Making the most out of a limited space for content creation can be very challenging. And while things are always changing, after several attempts, I found a YouTube setup that's been working really well for me, and I'm going to give a full breakdown of it from blank slate down to the final look with color grading. I'm also going to share some tips and ideas so you could achieve the perfect setup too. All right, so I set up this wide angle shot right here and cleared the entire room. So we are back at square one, a full reset. But anyways, this is my little home office that I also use as my YouTube set. I make it a point to only keep my desk clean while everything else is randomly placed, but that's why it's not on camera. I did want to make a disclaimer though. Aside from this, I am a full-time corporate videographer, and a lot of the gear that I use is meant for that. But for casual YouTube content, it is overkill. So I'll still talk about it, but I'll also talk about affordable alternative options, and that's going to come later on. So this is the Sony FX3 with a 35mm f1.8 prime lens on top of this regular aluminum tripod. And attached to the lens is the Parrot Padcaster teleprompter. I think I said that whole thing right. This thing helps so that I could read scripts and maintain eye contact without the words actually showing up through the lens. I just type up my scripts on Notion and copy and paste it to the Padcaster app, and then you kind of just take your phone and slip it under here, and then the words reflect, you could read it. Up top, I've got the XLR handle that comes with the FX3. I use it to power my microphone through phantom power. I've got this giant 10-inch monitor from FeelWorld, and this is really nice to have so I could monitor myself and make sure everything's looking good while I'm setting things up. And what's cool about having a monitor this big is that you can check your waveforms and still have enough display space to see yourself clearly. So I'm actually going to start recording right now so you could get an idea of the bare bones of the set. And I usually like using this foldable chair instead of the office chair because the office chair is just too big. It'll block the background and ruin that sense of depth that I'm trying to get. So I'm just gonna look at the monitor, make sure that I'm fully centered with the frame. And what's great about having such a big display is that you could see all the little things in your set that shouldn't be there, like this lens cap. And while I'm at it, I might as well set up the entire desk, and I'd love to give a full tour, but that's not what this video is about. I do have a video on that and I'll link it above, and it's really the most aesthetically pleasing thing in the room, and that's why I use it as part of my set. I have a specific wallpaper that I like to use, and to make sure that it's not too bright or too dim, I have a plugin called Display Control. It gives me keyboard access to the brightness settings. In this case, I'm gonna dim it a little bit. And to make sure that it doesn't fall asleep, I just change the power settings. I also set the focus to do not disturb so I don't get any unwanted notifications while I'm filming. And the last thing I do is change the height settings of my desk, and I have a specific preset for that. Just tap that. And the main thing for me is just making sure that the monitor doesn't like poke out of the top of my head too much. So what we've got right here, it's looking pretty good so far. Next up, I have this foldable table, which is actually marketed for camping, but I use it as part of my set. Since it's foldable, I could have it in when I'm filming and keep it stored away when I need to use my office as an office. The legs are adjustable. I like that it's bamboo because that's what my working desk is made out of, and it's just big enough to do product reviews on without it being too big for the space. For audio, I use the Sennheiser MKE 600 hooked up to my FX3. Normally, I would take the extra step of using an external recorder for higher bit rates on higher end productions, but the 24 bits internal on the FX3 is more than good enough for this setup. Plus it saves me the trouble of having to sync in post. It's actually recording right now, so I'm gonna switch over to that for the rest of the video. I used to set up the mic with a boom arm and have it positioned above my head where it's out of frame, but I figure that having it show up here makes it a practical set piece and gives some foreground to the image. I used the magic arm as a clamp and attached it to the foldable desk and adjusted it in a way where it's pointed at me and shows up in frame without it being too distracting. That's what I primarily do, but if I were to do a video where I'm using the desk to showcase products, that's when I'll boom the mic so it's out of the way. We are at the home stretch because we are now at my favorite part, which is lighting. Starting up with the key light that I just set up. It's the Nanlite 4. It's a 60 watt, and I have this 24-inch softbox attached to it with a grid. For anyone that's not too familiar, the softbox is meant to soften the light by taking the light, making the source bigger, in this case 24 inches. The bigger the source of the light, the softer it is, but in a small setting like this, a softbox of this size works just fine. The grid helps to minimize any spillage of light to other areas of the room, keeping the light more focused on the subject, which is me. My overkill of a room light back there is also from Nanlite, but it's a much bigger 300 watt version. It's my main light for actual gigs like corporate interviews, but when it's in storage, I use it as my room light. It's pointed against the wall because bouncing light is another way of softening it. In this case, the light source gets really big as it bounces off that entire corner of the room. And as you can see, even the shadows being casted against the wall, like from the plants on my desk, are pretty soft. It's an even spread of light to level out the room, which is exactly what I'm trying to do for this setup. But the softness of the light is also nice to have as a regular room light when I'm not filming and using the space as a regular office. It's much better than using a regular floor lamp from IKEA, and I like it even more than recessed lighting, so it's already good for both purposes. Next up, we have the blinds. I'm currently filming at night, and even if the rest of the lighting is on point, if the blinds that are in frame are dark, then it loses the motivation of this room being lit by natural daylight. So to fix that, I came up with this little trick where I put a foam core board against the window. Then I put this tube light here, which I also got from Nanlite, and when I turn it on, it reflects off the board and gives the effect of actual sunlight coming through the blinds. These tube lights can last on internal power for a while, but I can also plug it in and have it on for as long as I need. And this is great to have because I could film YouTube videos and not have to worry about what time of day it is. And I guess you could say that the daylight coming out of the windows act as a motivation for the key light, which is being sourced from the same side of the frame. So I have my iPad mini here, which is also a part of my YouTube setup. I just use it to connect to all of my devices and I could control them remotely. I'll also use it to reference notes too, but what I'm gonna do is use it to turn off all of the lights so you can see how everything works. Before that, I'll throw out the camera settings illustration so you guys could see that. It's just a basic 24 FPS setup, 180-degree rule for shutter speed, aperture opened up all the way, native ISO with white balance set to daylight, and it's important to have settings down first because that'll dictate how much power will be needed from the lights. But anyways, we are gonna start with the key light, which is usually set to 25% brightness. Then the room light, which is only at 5% brightness. Again, it's a really powerful light, so 5% is all I need. And last is the window light, which is usually set to 35% brightness. And yes, all of these lights are set to 5600 Kelvin, which is natural daylight. The very last thing that I have is this sort of accent light attached behind my monitor. I have the cable routed in a way where when I press the button, the light turns on, shining against the acoustic panels, and it gives this halo effect around my head to help separate myself from the background, adding a bit more depth to the image. And with that, we've got the full setup. So real quick for color grading, I just use Phantom LUTs, which I'll link down below. I just pick whichever one from the pack I think looks nice, then use a correction layer on top of it to adjust a bunch of other stuff like temperature, exposure. Sometimes I'll go as far as selecting the wall and messing around with the color wheel there. I feel like the colors can be a bit off because the wall paint has a weird tint to it. I've done this so many times that I have my usual changes saved into a LUT, and that saves me a lot of time because I could use it over and over again. So what you're seeing right now is the main composition, but it's important to be able to incorporate other angles to give more mileage to the space. So I'm going to talk about a couple that I've been using. One of my past videos where I'm talking about my everyday carry, I had my usual setup but used a second tighter angle, and that was done with my A7 IV on a monopod with a 24-105. I actually have it right here, without the monopod, of course. Then there's my over-the-shoulder angle that I used when I played Resident Evil on my iPhone. I used the same camera and monopod setup, just positioned on my desk. I also have a C-stand, and I've been using that to experiment with overhead shots for product reviews and unboxings. And going back to why I like the foldable bamboo desk is that it's just big enough to fill an entire shot from a 24mm focal length. The last angle is my desk monitor view, and that's for any type of tutorial that requires looking at a screen, like my wedding film editing breakdown that I posted a few weeks ago. Like I mentioned, the gear that I have is definitely overkill for this kind of content. Don't want to scare away any aspiring YouTubers out there, so I'm going to talk about some affordable alternatives. I did some research, and for lighting, the 80-watt GVM lights are really great value with the power, versatility, and quality. Given the price, I'd get 2 of these and use one of those lights with the softbox as my key light, and the other will have a stock reflector pointed against the wall as my room light. For the window video light, there are plenty of cheaper tube lights, or I could just take any ordinary video light, like the ones you could hook up to the shoe mount of a camera and angle it against the foam core board. Since it's a smaller source of light, the daylight effect isn't as convincing, but it's such a small detail that it's worth overlooking in order to save money. For audio, the Rode Video Mic Go Mark II connected to the camera's mic jack would work fine. I usually use Adobe Podcast Voice Enhancer to enhance my own voice tracks, so doing the same here should give a pretty good result. Another option is to just talk into your phone like it's one of those on-the-street vlogs, or I could try setting it on the table out of frame and converting the file to either MP3 or WAV, because the raw voice memos files aren't compatible with Adobe Podcast. But after putting it through Adobe Podcast, how do I sound now? I've used this feature so many times, so I'm going to assume that it sounds acceptable. What I've noticed is that the lower the quality of the original audio file, the more likely it is for a voice enhancer to make it sound robotic. If it helps, I could also try changing the quality of the voice memos files from compressed to lossless. It'll make the files bigger, but the more information a file has, the easier it is to work with. So it's more likely to give a better result. But if it's already sounding good now, then that might not even be necessary. Anyways, I'm gonna rub my hands together and snap to get us back to the main audio track. Last up is the main camera, and that can easily be switched out to something like the Sony a7C Mark II or the ZV-E1. They're both very current full-frame Sony cameras, so it'll match the FX3 pretty well. The more affordable price is due to a lack of some features compared to the FX3, but we're talking at-home YouTube videos, so the bells and whistles of the more expensive stuff isn't needed. I'd stick with the same lens because it's not very expensive to begin with. I'd keep the teleprompter, and as for the monitor, a smaller size will work just fine. And honestly, I could just use the built-in monitor on its own. The experience wouldn't be great, but if it means saving money, I can make it work, and you guys can too. If you really want to save money, you could just use your phone, which is convenient for me to say because I have the latest iPhone 15 Pro Max. I'll switch it up right now with a snap. So here I have the 24mm lens, and since it's wider than my Sony 35mm, I just brought the tripod, or in this case monopod, a little bit closer to match the framing a little bit. I'm filming in ProRes RAW, and I'll probably use Phantom LUTs with a little bit of correction, so let me know how it looks. I can't see myself, and I think that's a big downside to just using your phone to film, but I already did some test shots while framing, and I think it looks pretty solid. So mobile video quality has definitely come a long way, but if anything, this just proves how far lighting and set design can go to get a good image. I really think that it's important to have a holistic approach to building a YouTube setup. And for me, the thing I try to ask myself is, how do I create as much depth as I can with the space that I have to work with? I've used that word a couple times already, but that's what challenges me to be resourceful. One thing I've noticed about beginner tutorials, for example, is that they'll have a lot of emphasis on getting the nicest camera with the nicest lens, wide open aperture, more bokeh. And yeah, that helps, but it's not exactly the bokeh that makes an image look nice. It's the fact that it creates depth and separation from the subject. But there are other ways of getting that through other production aspects like lighting and set design. And that's why a set that focuses on those things could easily get away with being filmed on an iPhone, for example, and still look good. Just like how Apple shot their M3 MacBook Pro keynote with the 15 Pro, it's great marketing for the phone, but literally every other aspect outside of the phone was doing the heavy lifting to make the image look good. So if you're starting off, I'd recommend working with what you already have. I'd say that most people have some sort of home office setup in their room, so the easiest thing to do is to lean into that, which is what I did. Test all the different angles around your space using different focal lengths. For me, the sweet spot for talking head videos like this is between 24 to 35mm. I also like the look of ultra wide angles like 16mm, but there's only a small portion of my room that actually looks nice, so that's why I keep it at a tighter focal length at 35. Position yourself as far away from the back of the wall without being too close to the camera, so you're using the most possible space that the room can give you. That'll also help you determine how wide of a lens you need. Like if your space is small, then you'll probably want to consider a wider lens, while a bigger space will give you more flexibility. But once you have your framing finalized, that is what you build your set around. You could test the angles and focal lengths on your phone, and once you find something that you like, that's when it makes sense to commit to buying equipment and set pieces if you want anything more than what you already have. For equipment, I'd say a single key light, lens, camera, and microphone should be enough to start filming content, and that's the thing. Nothing should be perfect, and worrying about that that is just gonna stop you from making videos. The point is to start small, post whatever you make, evaluate, make small changes, then rinse and repeat so each video is a little bit better than before. My first talking head YouTube video was posted over 3 years ago, and I had no key lights, so I filmed against the window. Even then, I framed myself in front of my desk, and it doesn't look too bad, but compared to my current setup, it's literally night and day. Things will keep changing, but right now I think that this is a good use of the space and resources that I have for the best possible look. And I hope that you guys can draw some inspiration from this, not just the actual set, but how I put it together and my thought process behind all the little details. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one.